In 1839, deep in the cotton fields of Alabama, a wealthy colonel made an announcement that froze his entire household in silence. His wife, a woman weighing over 400 pounds and too weak to walk, would no longer be cared for by her servants. Instead, her new caretaker would be a slave, a dwarf named Silas, recently purchased for exactly $400. But what no one knew then, was that this decision would unleash one of the darkest medical experiments in American history. Welcome to Thornhill Manor, a story buried in the soil of the Old South, where science, sin, and madness became one. Part 1. The arrival of Silas. Approximately 1,000 words. Colonel Edmund Thornhill returned to his Alabama plantation in early 1839. His left arm hung stiff, shattered decades earlier by a Creek warrior's tomahawk, and his eyes carried the cold discipline of a man who had seen too much war. He ruled over 1,800 acres of cotton fields, a grand white-columned mansion, and 19 slaves who feared even the echo of his boots on the porch. His wife, Virgilia, once a celebrated beauty in Mobile society, now weighed more than 400 pounds. Disease had trapped her in a reinforced chair by the window. She couldn't climb stairs, could barely breathe in the summer heat, yet her mind remained sharp, and bitterly aware of her decline. Servants whispered that the colonel's love had turned into something darker, obsession. He no longer spoke to her like a husband, but like a doctor with a test subject. In his study, he kept journals filled with diagrams, medical notes, and words that no one dared read aloud. Then came the announcement. At dinner one humid evening, the colonel stood, his voice calm and sharp. "Greater than, from this day forward," he said, "Mrs. Thornhill's care will be overseen by Silas, a newly purchased servant with medical skill." The household froze. A dwarf slave, to care for the mistress. Even Virgilia's fan slipped from her trembling hand. What the servants didn't know, what no one outside the colonel's study could imagine, was that this was the first step in an experiment backed by a secret society of Southern elites called the Society of Medical Inquiry. 7 people had already died for this research. And Colonel Thornhill believed his wife's salvation lay not in medicine, but in the blood of another. The auction. 3 months earlier, in the port city of Mobile, Colonel Thornhill had stood in a crowded auction hall thick with sweat, smoke, and fear. At 11 o'clock, a small man was brought onto the stage. Silas was 3 feet 9 inches tall, a muscular dwarf with scars on his face and eyes that met the crowds without flinching. The auctioneer hesitated before describing him. "Greater than, literate," he said. "Speaks English and French. Assisted a doctor in Louisiana for 8 years. And, skilled in certain procedures." The crowd murmured uneasily. A literate slave was dangerous. One trained in surgery was worse. When Thornhill asked the price, the auctioneer said, $400. The colonel didn't haggle, he paid cash. That night, they camped along the road back to Dallas County. As the firelight flickered, Thornhill studied Silas. "Greater than, you can read." "Yes, master. And you know medicine. I assisted in over 200 surgeries." "Your owner, Drive, Beauchamp, died of yellow fever." "Yes. Yes, master." "You lie," Thornhill said coldly. "He was poisoned." Silas said nothing. The 2 men watched each other across the fire. For a long moment, it was clear, they both knew the truth. Each was dangerous in his own way. Thornhill Manor. When Silas arrived at the plantation, thunder rolled over the horizon. The slaves lined up silently as he climbed down from the wagon. His small figure seemed swallowed by the grand white mansion before him, Thornhill Manor, its tall columns gleaming like teeth in the storm light. Inside, he was brought before Virgilia. Even seated, her presence filled the room. Her breathing was heavy, her dark eyes sharp and intelligent. "Greater than, so this is the one," she said softly. "Come closer." Silas obeyed. She took his chin, turning his face from side to side. "Greater than, my husband says you know medicine." "Yes, mistress. And that you breathe easily." "That is what they say." "We're not interested in children," she said, a trace of amusement in her voice. "We are interested in something else." At that moment, Colonel Thornhill entered. That's enough, he said curtly. Silas will learn his duties tomorrow. As Silas followed the servant girl out of the room, he heard Virgilia whisper. He's perfect, Edmund. Exactly what we need. And the colonel's reply. Soon, my dear. Very soon. The sounds below. Silas's quarters were small, a former pantry near the kitchen, but it had something no other slave's room did, a lock on the inside. Each night, as he lay awake, he heard noises from beneath the floor, footsteps, metallic clinks, sometimes cries that were too soft to be human speech. When morning came, Thornhill set him to work recording notes about Virgilia's condition, her weight, her pulse, her breathing. The colonel spoke endlessly about science. Medicine today is blind superstition, he said. Leeches, mercury, prayer. The human body is a machine, Silas, and machines can be repaired. He showed Silas old journals filled with hand-drawn anatomical sketches, the pages stained with something dark, not ink. My mentor, Drive. Rutledge, taught me that life can be transferred, not just healed, Thornhill explained. If vitality is energy, why should it not move from one vessel to another? Silas listened quietly, his stomach turning. Then, one evening, the colonel led him to the basement. The air was cold and metallic. Lamps flickered over glass jars, strange machines with tubes and pumps, and tables with leather restraints. This, Thornhill said proudly, is where we will change medicine forever. Silas stared at the instruments and whispered. We, master. Of course, Thornhill said, smiling faintly. You are the donor. Virgilia is the recipient. We will share your vitality, your life force, with her. Silas's blood ran cold. And if it fails? Then we learn, Thornhill said simply. Science demands sacrifice. That night, Silas sat alone in his locked room, listening to the thunder outside, and the faint, rhythmic hum of machinery below. He knew then, the manor was not just a house. It was a laboratory built for something unspeakable. And soon, he would be its first experiment. Outro. Narrator tone. What happened beneath Thornhill Manor in the following weeks would haunt Alabama's history forever. And when a mysterious doctor arrived from Charleston, carrying crates of instruments and secrets, the true horror began. Skull Part 2. The Doctor from Charleston, coming next. Subscribe to Liturgy of Fear and ring that bell so you don't miss what happened when science met sin in the heart of the Old South. Tell us in the comments, would you have stayed in Thornhill Manor that night? Would you like me to continue with Part 2, 1000 words, The Doctor from Charleston, next, keeping the same cinematic, YouTube narration tone? Movie Camera, The Thornhill Experiments, Part 2, The Manor of Secrets. Firehook intro, for YouTube opening. They said Thornhill Manor was cursed, that the screams heard from its basement weren't ghosts, but something worse. When Silas arrived there as a medical assistant, he thought he'd escaped slavery. He was wrong. He had just stepped into the heart of a nightmare. Drop of Blood Part 2 The Manor of Secrets. The rain started just as the wagon turned off the main road. Thunder rolled over the hills, and lightning flashed across the sky, lighting up the outline of Thornhill Manor, a great, sprawling mansion standing alone against the storm. Dr. Edmund Thornhill sat stiffly beside Silas, his injured arm cradled against his chest. When we arrive, he said, his voice calm but cold, you will meet my wife. You will be respectful, obedient, and attentive to her needs. She is ill, but not in a way that ordinary medicine can cure. Silas nodded. Yes, master. Thornhill smiled faintly. Good. Then we understand each other. As they pulled up to the grand iron gates, lightning illuminated the house, tall windows, carved columns, and dark shutters that looked like eyes staring down. A small group of household slaves hurried out to meet them, their faces blank, their eyes lowered. Silas climbed down from the wagon. The chains were gone, but he knew better than to think he was free. A man like him, small, dark-skinned, and marked by his past, would never make it far in the wild country that surrounded the estate. Inside, the manor was silent except for the ticking of a tall clock and the whisper of rain against the windows. Virgilia Thornhill, the lady of the house, waited for him in the drawing room. She sat near the window in a wide, reinforced chair, dressed in dark green silk that shimmered like a serpent's skin. Her face was pale, her eyes sharp and bright. "So this is the one," she said softly. "Come closer." Silas obeyed. She reached out and gripped his chin, turning his face side to side. "Edmund says you have medical training." "Yes, mistress." "And breeding capabilities," she added matter-of-factly. 17 children, all healthy. Silas's voice was low. "So I have been told, mistress. They were sold, shortly after birth." For just a moment, something flickered in her eyes, guilt, perhaps, or sorrow, then it was gone. "We are not interested in children, Silas," she said. "We have other goals. My husband has explained nothing, I suppose." "No, mistress. Typical Edmund," she said, with a thin smile. "He enjoys his secrets." She released him, breathing heavily. "I am dying, Silas. Slowly. My body grows weaker and heavier each month. The doctors offer prayers and poison. But my husband and I, we believe there are older ways. Forbidden ways. We mean to find them." Before Silas could respond, Thornhill entered the room. "That's enough, Virgilia," he said. "Silas must see his quarters." Virgilia laughed softly, a sound that turned into a cough. "Of course. Show him his cage, Edmund. But do hurry, I am eager to begin." As Silas was led away, he heard her whisper. "He's perfect, Edmund. Exactly what we need." And Thornhill replied, "Soon, my dear. Very soon. Silas's quarters were small, a converted pantry off the kitchen, barely large enough for a bed and a table. Yet it had two things no slave dared dream of, a window and a lock on the inside. That first night, Silas couldn't sleep. The wind howled outside, and from somewhere below the floor, faint sounds drifted up, footsteps, whispers, and once, a soft cry that didn't sound quite human. Each morning at 6, he attended Colonel Thornhill in the study. It was a grand room filled with shelves of medical books, jars of preserved organs, and strange instruments whose purpose Silas could only guess. His duties seemed simple. Record Virgilia's weight, her meals, her breathing, the swelling of her ankles. But there were other notebooks too, older ones, bound in cracked leather, their pages stained with something darker than ink. When Silas's eyes lingered too long on one of them, Thornhill caught him. "You are curious," he said with a thin smile. "Good. Curiosity is the sign of a sharp mind. But understand this, medicine, as most men practice it, is blind superstition. Leeches, prayers, bleeding. Fool's remedies." He opened one of the ancient books. Drawings filled its pages, human bodies cut open with disturbing precision. "The ancients knew more than we do," he continued. "The Egyptians, the Greeks, they understood that the body's essence, its vitality, could be transferred. Not destroyed. Transferred." Silas's heart pounded. "Transferred, master. Have you never wondered," Thornhill said, leaning closer, "why some people thrive while others wither? Why a child can survive wounds that would kill a grown man? It is not divine mystery, Silas. It is life energy, and I intend to control it." A week later, Thornhill led Silas into the basement. The air was cool and heavy. Oil lamps burned low, revealing a chamber that looked part hospital, part torture room. Tables with leather straps, cabinets full of knives and needles, glass jars filled with preserved specimens. And stranger things, brass machines connected by tubes, pumps, and wires. "We begin with simple observation," Thornhill said. "Before we can attempt a transfer, we must study both subjects." "Both, master?" Silas asked carefully. Thornhill smiled without warmth. "You didn't think this was only about my wife, did you?" "No, every experiment needs a donor and a recipient. Virgilia will receive. You, my clever friend, will give." The room seemed to tilt. Silas's mouth went dry. "You mean, my life?" "Not your life," Thornhill said calmly. "Your vitality. The process should not be fatal, if my calculations are correct." You will be weak for a time, but you will recover. And if not, he shrugged. Then we will learn something valuable. Progress demands sacrifice. That night, Silas sat in his tiny room, staring at the candle flame. He had seen this before, doctors in New Orleans who cut open living men in the name of science. But Thornhill's obsession was something deeper, darker. He understood now what had happened to the 7 other dwarfs who had vanished from auction records across the South. He had been brought here to replace them. But Silas was not done living. Not yet. He would play along, study Thornhill's notes, and learn everything he could. Because if Thornhill wanted to steal his life, Silas would make sure the price was paid in blood. Candle to be continued in Part 3, The First Procedure. Movie Camera, The Thornhill Experiments, Part 3, The Devil's Physician. Firehook intro for YouTube. When the devil visits, he doesn't come with horns, he comes in a black carriage with medical tools. And when Dr. Constance Rutledge stepped into Thornhill Manor, Silas realized. This wasn't medicine anymore. It was witchcraft wearing a doctor's coat. Coffin Part 3 The Devil's Physician. The basement had grown colder since Thornhill's last words. Silas stood still, his heart beating so hard he thought the sound might give him away. Virgilia will receive, Thornhill had said. You, my intelligent friend, will give. Silas had seen enough to understand what that meant. He would not die quickly, he would fade. Drained, used, and discarded once the vital energy was gone. But he did what he always did best. He hid his fear and listened. Knowledge was the only weapon left to him. That night, from his small room, he heard the creak of the stairs. The soft murmur of Virgilia's voice. And the faint hum of those machines below, metal turning against metal, like a monster breathing in the dark. He didn't sleep. 3 weeks passed before the storm finally broke, and with it came the visitor. A carriage arrived just after sunrise, black as a hearse, its wheels crunching over the gravel path. From it stepped a tall, rail-thin man with a silver-tipped cane and eyes so pale they looked almost blind. Dr. Constance Rutledge. The household slaves froze as he passed. No one met his gaze. Even Thornhill, for all his arrogance, seemed smaller beside him. Silas watched from the kitchen window, pretending to chop onions. 2 strong men carried heavy wooden crates from the carriage, unmarked, and spoken. They took them straight down to the basement. That's the devil himself, whispered Esther, the cook. Her knife never stopped moving. Been coming here for years. Some say he made Miss Virgilia sick in the first place. Silas's hands paused. Why would he do that? Esther leaned closer, her voice trembling. For his experiments. She wasn't always like this, big and weak. Used to be beautiful, but after the colonel came back from Charleston, after studying with the old drive Rutledge, she started chongin'. Swellin', could barely walk. Now that old devil still comes here, brings his tools, and folks vanish. Silas frowned. Vanished. Slaves, she whispered. Bought at auction, brought here, and then, gone. Colonel says he sold 'em. But Marcus heard the screams. And the sounds. She didn't finish. Before Silas could speak again, Celia entered, her face stiff as stone. Silas. The colonel wants you. Now. The study smelled of tobacco, ink, and something metallic. Thornhill stood by the window, his arm wrapped tight in a black sling. Rutledge stood beside him, pale eyes fixed on Silas the way a butcher looks at a calf. So this is the specimen, Rutledge said. Excellent musculature. Well kept for his condition. He walked around Silas, studying him from every angle. And literate, I hear. Thornhill nodded. Quite so. Test him yourself. Rutledge pulled a book from the shelf, a thick medical text, and handed it to Silas. Read. Silas read aloud, voice calm despite his racing pulse. A passage on surgical wounds, even the Latin terms. Rutledge's eyebrows lifted. Remarkable. He looked to Thornhill. He understands enough to describe the process. That will be useful. Thornhill's lips curled in a faint smile. I thought the same. If the procedure causes pain or unusual sensations, he can document it, assuming he remains conscious. Rutledge chuckled. Pain is the purest data there is. He turned back to Silas. Tell me, boy, how much pain can you bear? Silas met his eyes. I've been a slave for 31 years, doctor. I've learned to endure. Rutledge nodded slowly. Good. You'll need that. He unrolled a large sheet of parchment across the desk. It showed 2 human bodies, side by side, connected by a web of tubes and needles. Each figure was labeled in neat, elegant handwriting, donor and recipient. Silas stepped closer despite himself. His stomach turned. Rutledge's voice became smooth, almost proud. Greater than, we begin with controlled bloodletting. None of that medieval nonsense, precise amounts, measured to the dram. From here, he pointed to the diagram's arms and thighs, and here. Simultaneously, he continued, we administer a tonic to the recipient. A special mixture, mercury, belladonna, and certain herbs the native tribes once used in their healing rituals. Thornhill added quietly, the tonic prepares the body to receive the transfer. Rutledge nodded. Yes, it opens what I call the vital channels. Once open, we connect the donor's veins to the recipient's and begin the exchange. Blood, but more than blood. Essence. He paused, eyes shining. The ancients called it the vital spirit. Modern science calls it nonsense. But they are wrong. Life can be measured, moved, controlled. It flows like current, and I intend to master it. Silas kept his face blank, but his mind was burning. He understood now. Thornhill wasn't trying to cure his wife. He was trying to steal life from others to keep her alive. And Silas was next in line. That night, the manor was quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock and the steady drip of rain outside. Silas sat in his narrow bed, staring at the locked door. From below came faint noises, the clatter of metal, the murmur of men's voices, the soft gasp of pain. The first experiment had begun. He imagined Virgilia strapped to that table, her pale face half lit by lantern light. He imagined the tubes, the smell of blood, the hum of the strange machines. And he imagined his own turn coming soon. He'd survived monsters before, men who thought science gave them the right to play God. But Thornhill and Rutledge, they were something worse. They believed they were saving the world. As dawn crept through the small window, Silas whispered a promise to himself. Greater than, I will learn everything. I will remember every word, every device, every secret in this house. And when the time comes, I'll end this. Drop of blood to be continued in Part 4, the first procedure. Part 4, the experiment begins. The night the experiment began, the air in Thornhill Manor was thick with heat and tension. Even the insects outside had gone silent, as if nature itself refused to witness what was about to happen. Silas was summoned to the basement just after midnight. 2 oil lamps burned on the landing, their light dim and trembling. Marcus and Isaiah stood by the door, their eyes fixed on the ground, unwilling to look at him. Celia waited below, her face pale, hands folded in front of her apron. Come, Silas, Colonel Thornhill said, his tone almost cheerful. Doctor, Rutledge has everything prepared. You're about to make history. Silas followed, his mind calm but alert. He had decided, whatever happened tonight, he would remember everything. Every sound, every face, every smell. Knowledge was power, and one day, it might save his life. The laboratory was colder than usual. The floor was scrubbed clean, and the stone walls gleamed with condensation. Strange instruments filled the room, glass tubes, copper coils, and heavy iron stands. At the center stood 2 long tables, side by side. Virgilia Thornhill lay on one, her pale, swollen body covered with a linen sheet up to her neck. Her breathing was ragged but steady. On the second table, a space waited for Silas. Doctor. Rutledge turned from a small table where he was mixing a dark red tonic in a glass beaker. Good evening, my subject, he said, his voice cool and detached. Lie down, please. We'll begin the preliminary testing shortly. Silas climbed onto the table. The wood was cold against his back. Iron cuffs locked around his wrists and ankles, not tight enough to hurt but enough to keep him from moving. Rutledge nodded approvingly. Thornhill stepped forward, his face glowing with a terrible excitement. Do you understand what's about to happen, Silas? Yes, Master, Silas said evenly. You're going to try to transfer vitality from me to your wife. Excellent, Rutledge said, as if complimenting a student. Now, we start with the calibration. He took out a long metal needle attached to a thin glass tube. With steady hands, he inserted it into Silas's arm. Blood began to flow, dark and slow. Another needle went into Virgilia's arm, connected by a twisting glass coil. The doctor adjusted a valve, and the blood began to move between them. At first, Silas felt nothing. Only the faint pull in his arm, like a small tug beneath the skin. Then a deep cold began spreading through his chest, as if something inside him was being drained away. He clenched his teeth but made no sound. Note his pulse, Rutledge said. Strong, but slowing slightly. Very good. Increase the tonic to the recipient. Celia, trembling, brought a cup to Mrs. Thornhill's lips. The liquid was thick and dark, its smell sharp and bitter. Virgilia swallowed weakly, her eyes fluttering open for the first time that night. Thornhill gripped her hand. You'll be well again soon, my love. You'll see. You'll rise from that bed stronger than before. Silas's vision blurred. The cold in his chest turned to burning heat, then back again, like waves of fever and frost. He tried to focus on Rutledge's voice as the doctor muttered notes. Subject A's pupils dilated, tremors in the extremities, heart rate irregular but stable. Subject B, color improving slightly. Fascinating. For a moment, Silas thought he saw the color return to Virgilia's cheeks. Her fingers twitched. Thornhill gasped with joy, but then her back arched violently. A terrible cry escaped her lips. The glass tubes shuddered as blood reversed its flow. The room filled with the metallic scent of it. Stop, Thornhill shouted. You're hurting her. Rutledge ignored him. No, this is it. The vital essence is resisting equilibrium. We're on the edge of success. Silas felt something sharp stab into his neck. The pain exploded down his spine. His body convulsed. The iron cuffs rattled against the table. He heard voices, far away, distorted. Thornhill shouting, Celia sobbing, Rutledge laughing, mad with triumph. Then darkness. When Silas woke, the lamps were low. His whole body ached. He tried to sit up, but the world spun and his stomach twisted with nausea. The cuffs were gone. Someone had covered him with a blanket. Celia was beside him, whispering softly. Don't move too fast. You've been out near 3 hours. He swallowed hard. Mrs. Thornhill. Celia hesitated. Alive. But, not right. She looked toward the other table. Virgilia Thornhill still lay there, but her breathing had changed. It was deeper, slower, unnatural. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. And when Silas caught her gaze for an instant, he felt his stomach drop. Her eyes were no longer the pale blue he remembered. They were dark, almost black. Rutledge entered, wiping his hands on a cloth stained with red. Marvelous, he murmured. Truly marvelous. The transference occurred. Partial success, at least. Thornhill looked pale and shaken. She's breathing, but she doesn't answer me. She doesn't even blink. Temporary paralysis, Rutledge said dismissively. Her body is adjusting to the new vitality. By morning, she'll recover. You'll see. But Silas saw something neither man noticed. A faint tremor running through Virgilia's fingers, a twitch that repeated every few seconds. And beneath her skin, a strange pulse moved, not in rhythm with her heartbeat, but slower, deeper. That night, after everyone left the laboratory, Silas lay awake on his cot, his body still weak but his mind sharp. He had seen something that defied reason. For a moment, while the transfer was happening, he had felt not just pain but connection, a pull between himself and the woman on the other table. And in that connection, something had passed between them. Something more than blood. He closed his eyes, but sleep did not come. From somewhere below, faintly through the wooden floor, he heard a sound. A whisper, a voice that was not his own, echoing in his head. Help me, it said. And Silas realized with horror that it was Mrs. Thornhill's voice, speaking inside him. He pressed his hands to his ears, but the whisper didn't stop. It grew stronger. Help me, Silas, before he does it. Again. He turned his face to the wall, shaking. He knew then that what had happened tonight was only the beginning. And whatever had been transferred between them, it wasn't just life. It was something far darker. Something that wanted out. Part 5, The Voice Within. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, as if the sky itself mourned something unseen. Thornhill Manor was unusually quiet. Even the servants moved slower, their whispers hushed. Silas sat up on his cot, every muscle sore, his mind still echoing with that impossible voice. Help me, Silas, before he does it again. He'd heard it again at dawn, soft, pleading, coming from somewhere deep inside his skull. When he pressed his hand to his chest, he could swear he felt 2 heartbeats, his own, and another faint pulse beneath it, like an echo that didn't belong to him. Celia entered quietly, carrying a tray of broth. Her eyes flicked nervously toward the door. You need to eat, she said. Doctor Rutledge said you'll be needed again soon. Silas managed a thin smile. He's already planning another one. Celia nodded. He and the colonel been in the lab all morning. Miss Vigilia woke up before sunrise. But, Silas, she ain't the same. He froze. What do you mean? She talks different, moves different. Yesterday she couldn't even lift her head. Now she's walking the halls. But her eyes, Lord, Silas, her eyes ain't right. Like she's looking through you, not at you. Silas's stomach turned cold. The memory of those black eyes in the dim light came back like a fever dream. I need to see her, he said. Celia shook her head sharply. Don't. Colonel don't want no one near her but the doctor and him. He's proud, says she's recovering. But Isaiah told me last night he heard her talking to herself. Said she was whispering your name. Silas felt the air go out of his chest. My name. Celia nodded. Over and over. Like she was calling you. Before he could reply, footsteps sounded in the hall. Dr. Rutledge entered, his white beard glinting with sweat, his eyes bright and feverish. Excellent, you're awake, he said briskly. How do you feel? Weak, Silas answered truthfully. But I'll recover. Good. You'll need strength for the next trial. We'll repeat the process in 2 days. Smaller dosage, controlled exchange. This time, I'll monitor humoral response with my new apparatus. The results were unprecedented. Silas met his gaze evenly. And Mrs. Thornhill, she's well. Rutledge's expression flickered, just for a moment. Extraordinarily well. The transfer succeeded beyond expectation. You should be proud, Silas. You've given your mistress a gift. Proud. The word stung like poison. When Rutledge left, Silas waited until the hall was empty. Then he rose, swaying on weak legs, and made his way toward the main house. The parlor door was half open. He could hear Colonel Thornhill's voice inside, low, strained. Constance, please, you must rest. You've been up all night. I'm fine, came Virgilia's voice. But it didn't sound like her. It was deeper, slower, with an odd rhythm. Better than I've felt in years. Silas peeked through the crack. Virgilia stood by the window, sunlight spilling across her face. Her skin was pale but smooth, her body no longer swollen. But her movements were strange, too fluid, like a puppet on invisible strings. When she turned her head, her eyes caught the light. For a heartbeat, they flashed that same unnatural black. I dreamt, she murmured, that I was drowning. And then, someone pulled me back. A hand, warm and strong. I could feel his heartbeat. His heartbeat, Edmund. Thornhill stepped closer, uneasy. You mean mine? No. Her lips curved into a small smile. Not yours. Silas backed away before he could be seen. His heart pounded. He knew who she meant. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt her presence, like a shadow pressing against his thoughts. Images flashed before him. Dark water, a woman's hand reaching out, and a whisper that crawled through his skull. You opened the door, Silas. Now you must help me close it. He sat up, breathing hard. Who are you? He whispered into the darkness. The voice came again, faint but clear. Not who. What's left? He took my life. He trapped it between worlds. But when the blood flowed, part of me went into you. Silas's skin prickled. You mean, your soul? A silence, then a whisper like wind through dry leaves. What remains of it? And if he continues, others will suffer the same. Before Silas could respond, the door creaked open. Celia slipped in, eyes wide with fear. Silas, she whispered, something's wrong in the lab. You need to see. They crept down the corridor to the basement stairs. The air smelled of metal and rot. From below came a faint humming sound, like machinery running under strain. At the bottom of the stairs, they stopped. The laboratory was lit by dozens of candles. Dr. Rutledge stood beside a new contraption, a tall glass cylinder filled with dark liquid. Inside it floated something pale, human-shaped but wrong. Its face was featureless, its limbs twisted. Thornhill hovered nearby, muttering to himself. It's only the beginning. We'll refine it. We'll perfect it. Celia covered her mouth. Dear God. Rutledge adjusted a dial. This, he said, is vitality extracted and stabilized. A vessel of pure life essence. Once we can store it, we can transfer it at will. No need for subjects. Silas's stomach churned. You're creating life from death. Rutledge turned sharply. Ah, Silas. Just in time. You'll be pleased to know your contribution was invaluable. Without your donation, this specimen would not exist. What is it? Silas asked, voice low. An echo, Rutledge said proudly. A shadow of vitality. It is not alive, yet, but it holds potential. Given time, it might even think. Celia whimpered. It's an abomination. Rutledge's eyes blazed. No, it's progress. Imagine, immortality. A man could live forever by transferring his essence into new vessels. Flesh is only a container. The spirit can be moved. At that, the cylinder began to tremble. The liquid inside rippled violently. The shape's eyes opened, two black voids, just like Virgilia's. The candles flickered out. A sound filled the room, low, wet, and terrible. It wasn't human. The cylinder cracked from top to bottom, spilling dark fluid across the floor. Thornhill shouted for Marcus and Isaiah, but they didn't come. Celia screamed as the shape inside began to crawl from the wreckage, its movements jerky, its body collapsing and reforming like melting wax. Rutledge staggered back, his pride turning to horror. It's impossible. It shouldn't. The thing let out a gurgling cry and lunged. The doctor's scream was cut short as it wrapped around him, dragging him to the floor. The air filled with choking fumes. Silas grabbed Celia's arm. Run. They bolted up the stairs, the sound of crashing glass echoing behind them. At the top, Silas slammed the door shut and wedged a chair beneath the handle. From below came the faint, awful sound of something whispering, many voices, blending into one. Silas leaned against the wall, shaking. Celia's voice broke the silence. What was that? He swallowed hard. Whatever it was, he said, it's not finished with us yet. And deep inside his mind, Mrs. Thornhill's voice answered softly, no, Silas, he isn't finished. And neither am I. Part 6, The Shadow Below. The screams from the basement echoed long into the night. No one in Thornhill Manor slept. Even the air seemed to throb with fear. By morning, silence had returned, heavy, unnatural silence. Colonel Thornhill ordered everyone to stay upstairs. Marcus and Isaiah were sent to guard the basement door, though both men looked pale and hollow-eyed. Silas sat in the servants' quarters, his hands trembling around a cup of black coffee. Celia sat beside him, still shaking. Neither had spoken much since the night before. Finally, she whispered, "Do you think he's dead?" Silas didn't answer right away. The image of Dr. Rutledge's face, frozen in terror as that thing dragged him down, would not leave his mind. "I don't know," he said. "But if he's not, something worse might be waiting down there." Before Celia could respond, heavy footsteps sounded in the hall. Colonel Thornhill appeared in the doorway. His coat was stained, his eyes red-rimmed but blazing with a manic light. "Silas," he said, voice low but steady. "Come with me." Celia rose. "Please, Colonel, stay out of this," he snapped. "This is between me and the donor." Silas rose slowly. "As you wish, Master." Thornhill led him through the long corridor and down the narrow steps. The air grew colder with every step. The smell of chemicals and blood mixed with something far fouler, like rotten burnt copper. When they reached the bottom, Silas froze. The laboratory was wrecked. Glass shards glittered like ice across the floor. The copper tubes were twisted and blackened as if scorched from within. And in the corner, where the glass cylinder had shattered, the floor was slick with a dark, dried substance that looked like congealed tar. Dr. Rutledge's coat lay nearby. It was torn nearly in half. But there was no body. "He's gone," Thornhill said, his voice trembling with rage and wonder. "Dragged into the wall. I saw it happen. The creature pulled him through solid stone like it was water." Silas scanned the far wall. There, behind a row of shelves, the brick was cracked and blackened. The outline of something vaguely human was burned into it, like a shadow scorched into stone. "What is it, Master?" "Proof," Thornhill whispered. "Proof that it worked. The energy transferred, not just vitality, but essence, spirit. The doctor's life has merged with the material. We stand on the brink of divine discovery." Silas turned toward him slowly. "You call that divine?" Thornhill's face twisted. "You don't understand, boy. Science requires sacrifice. We have glimpsed immortality. Rutledge may be gone, but his work will live on through me. And through you." He stepped closer, his eyes fever bright. "You will assist me in reconstructing the experiment. We'll refine the tonic, stabilize the flow. I'll perfect what he began." Silas stared at the cracked wall again. For a brief instant, he thought he saw movement, a faint shimmer, like something shifting behind the stone. "I'll need time," Silas said carefully. "To prepare, to recover my strength." Thornhill nodded absently. "Yes, yes. Rest tonight. Tomorrow we begin again." That night, Silas didn't rest. He waited until the house was asleep, then slipped out of his room and crept toward the main hall. He moved silently, his bare feet gliding across the wooden floor. He had to see her. Mrs. Thornhill's door was slightly open. A faint candle glowed inside. She sat by the window, her hair loose around her shoulders, whispering softly to herself. The sound sent a chill through him. It was a woman's voice, but layered beneath it was another tone, lower, distorted, almost like a man whispering along with her. When Silas entered, she turned. "Silas," she said, and for a moment her voice was her own. "You came." He hesitated. "You called to me." She smiled faintly. "I remember. Pain. Then darkness. And then your voice. You held me in that place between life and death." Her hand lifted, trembling. "And now, I hear them. The ones he took before me. They whisper in the dark corners. They say he fed on their strength, drained them until nothing was left." Silas stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Mrs. Thornhill, whatever he's done, it's not medicine. It's murder." Her expression hardened. "I know. And he'll do it again if we don't stop him." Silas blinked. "We," she nodded slowly. "You and I share something now. When he mixed our blood, he tied our lives together. I can feel you when you're near, hear your thoughts when you dream." He shuddered. "And the others? The ones before me?" Her gaze drifted toward the floor. "They're still here, beneath us. Their energy is trapped in the stone, screaming to be freed." As if on cue, a faint vibration shivered through the room. The candle flame flickered. From the hallway came a slow, dragging sound, something heavy scraping against the boards. Mrs. Thornhill's eyes widened. "He's awake." Silas turned. "Who?" "The doctor." The scraping grew louder, closer. The door creaked. For an instant, a shadow moved across the threshold, tall, thin, and wrong. Then it vanished. Silas grabbed her hand. "We have to leave." She stood, unsteady. "Not yet. If we go, he'll follow. We need to destroy what's below. The machines, the tonics, everything." They moved quickly, gathering candles and flint, anything that could burn. Celia met them in the corridor, clutching a Bible to her chest. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. "Marcus and Isaiah are gone. The colonel sent them down hours ago. They never came back." The three descended together, carrying light into the dark. The laboratory looked worse in the flickering glow. The air buzzed faintly, as if electricity crawled through the walls. The cracked bricks pulsed softly, faint red veins spreading like roots. Lord have mercy, Celia whispered. Mrs. Thornhill stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong. He's feeding through the walls. The essence needs hosts. That's how he's still alive. They poured lamp oil across the tables, over the scattered notes and broken instruments. Silas struck the flint. The fire caught quickly, crawling up the wood and licking the copper tubes. The smell of burning chemicals filled the air. Then came the sound, a low wail, rising from the stones. The cracked wall bulged outward as if something inside it was pushing to escape. The shadow shape twisted and writhed. Go, Silas shouted, but Mrs. Thornhill didn't move. She was staring at the wall, her eyes black again. He's not just in the stone, she whispered. He's in me. The fire roared higher. The ceiling beams began to groan. Come on. Silas grabbed her arm. You'll die here. She smiled faintly. Maybe that's the only way to end it. Before he could stop her, she tore free and pressed both hands against the wall. A burst of light exploded through the room, bright, blinding, and cold. Silas fell to his knees. The sound of screaming filled the air, dozens of voices, crying out at once. Then silence. When he looked up, the wall was still. The fire burned low, smoke curling toward the ceiling. Mrs. Thornhill lay motionless on the floor, her hair spread around her like dark water. Silas crawled to her side. Constance, please. Her lips moved faintly. It's not over, she whispered. He's still here. Then her eyes rolled back, and she went still. From somewhere behind the cracked wall came a sound, slow, rhythmic, like breathing. Silas looked at the flames climbing higher and knew, with a terrible certainty, that the experiment had not ended. It had only changed form. Part 7: The House That Remembers. Historic and Horror Story. 1,000 words. The night after Lucas's discovery of the diary was a storm that tore through Hollow Creek like a furious ghost reclaiming its land. Rain lashed against the windows of the Blackwood estate, and the old timbers groaned as though whispering secrets to the wind. Lucas sat by the flickering light of the fireplace, the diary open on his knees, its pages trembling under his fingers. He had read enough to know that Reverend Blackwood's obsession had gone far beyond religion, it had spiraled into something darker. The diary spoke of rituals, blood offerings, and the summoning of something called the Witness of the Hollow. It was said to be an entity that lived between the world of the living and the dead, a being that demanded sacrifice in exchange for divine revelation. Lucas's eyes burned as he read the final words penned by the Reverend. If the witness shall come, it must be bound to the house. The curse will ensure its hunger remains eternal. The thunder cracked above the estate, and Lucas nearly dropped the book. Somewhere in the distance, the great church bell of Hollow Creek rang once, though it had been rusted silent for over 50 years. He froze. No one had been inside that church since the fire of 1893. Lucas grabbed his lantern and coat and made for the door. The rain beat down hard, soaking him to the bone as he trudged through the muddy path toward the church ruins. The bell tower loomed like a blackened skeleton in the lightning flashes. As he neared, he saw something that made him stop cold. The church doors, long fused shut by time, were open. A dull red glow seeped from inside. The air felt heavier, thicker, as though the night itself were pressing down on him. Lucas raised his lantern and stepped inside. The pews were covered in soot and cobwebs. The altar, broken in two, lay at an angle. But the strange glow came not from any fire, it came from beneath the floorboards near the pulpit. Lucas knelt down and found a loose plank. Beneath it was a hollow filled with old relics, bones, a rusted crucifix, and a jar of what looked like dried blood. And at the center, a small, blackened book bound in leather, its cover cracked and warm to the touch. Lucas hesitated, but the moment his fingers brushed the book, the air shifted. The candle stubs on the altar flickered to life by themselves. The crucifix on the wall turned, metal groaning as it twisted upside down. Then came the whisper. It didn't come from behind him, or in front of him, it came through him. You read his words, the voice murmured. Now you must finish what he began. Lucas stumbled back, clutching the book. His breath came in ragged gasps. Who's there? He shouted into the darkness. No answer, only the rustling sound of the wind, but it wasn't wind. It was breathing, Slow, deep, coming from beneath the church floor. The boards began to creak, rising and falling as if something enormous moved below. Lucas turned to run, but the doors slammed shut, trapping him inside. His lantern flickered, dimmed, then died. Only the red glow remained. It pulsed like a heartbeat. And in that red haze, shapes began to form, shadow figures standing among the pews. They looked human but wrong, their faces stretched, eyes hollow. One stepped forward, its voice a trembling whisper that carried the tone of reverence. "You carry the mark of Blackwood. The blood remembers. The house remembers." Lucas shook his head. "I'm not part of this. I just found his diary. I don't even believe in this." The shadow's head tilted. "Belief is not required. The curse does not fade. The house has chosen." Lucas backed toward the altar, but the floor cracked beneath his heel. He fell through with a cry, landing in the darkness below. His lantern shattered, but the red light followed, seeping through cracks in the ground. He was in a crypt, an underground chamber beneath the church. The walls were lined with old coffins, each marked with the same symbol from the diary, a triangle within a circle, crossed by a line of blood. And on the far wall hung a mural, painted in ash and dried red. It depicted Reverend Blackwood himself, kneeling before a monstrous, eyeless being that rose from a pit of flame. The witness. The figure's arms were outstretched, its mouth wide and filled with darkness. Lucas felt the book tremble in his hand. The cover creaked open by itself, pages fluttering until they stopped on a passage that seemed to pulse with life. "The heir shall come. The door shall open again. The witness shall feed, and the curse be renewed." He didn't understand, until he noticed the bloodstains on the wall were fresh. Something moved behind him, a scraping sound, then the unmistakable creak of a coffin lid. Lucas turned slowly. A figure was rising from one of the coffins, a decayed corpse in priestly robes, its skull covered by a cracked mask of ivory. One bony hand reached toward him. "Reverend Blackwood," Lucas whispered, paralyzed by terror. The corpse's jaw opened with a sickening crack. "You should not have read what was sealed." Lucas scrambled back, clutching the book like a shield. "Stay away." But the Reverend's hollow sockets glowed with faint red light. "The house remembers," he hissed again, stepping closer. "It always remembers." The ground trembled. The mural on the wall began to move, as though the figure within it were trying to tear free. The witness's shadow stretched across the floor, reaching for Lucas. He screamed and ran, tripping through the broken stones of the crypt, clawing his way toward a staircase that led upward. The voices rose behind him, hundreds of them, whispering his name. When he burst through the church doors, the storm outside had vanished. The night was silent, the rain was gone, but Hollow Creek was not the same. The lights of the town were out. The houses stood dark and empty, as if every soul had been erased. The air shimmered faintly red. Lucas turned back to the church, and saw that its bell tower was now whole again, its windows burning with crimson fire. And at the highest window, silhouetted against that glow, stood the shape of the Reverend, watching him. Lucas fell to his knees, clutching the cursed diary, realizing the truth. He hadn't just uncovered the past. He had brought it back. And the house, somewhere behind him, at the edge of the trees, was awake again. To be continued. Part 8: The Crimson Veil. Historic and Horror Story 1000 words. The morning after the storm, Hollow Creek was cloaked in a strange silence. No birds sang, no wind stirred the trees. A crimson haze hung over the valley, tinting everything in a dull, blood-like glow. Lucas staggered down the dirt road leading back to the Blackwood estate, his mind a storm of confusion and dread. He had seen the Reverend's corpse rise. He had heard voices whisper his name in the crypt. But as the pale daylight crept over the hills, everything appeared normal. The church stood in ruin again, the bell tower shattered, and the red glow gone. It was as if the night had been a fevered dream. Yet the book in his hands felt warm, alive. Its leather cover pulsed faintly beneath his fingers, as though it had a heartbeat of its own. When he reached the estate, the front gate stood open. The crows that normally perched along the iron fence were gone. The silence pressed against his ears, heavy and unnatural. Inside, the house smelled different. The faint scent of burning wax and iron lingered in the air. Every hallway he passed seemed longer than before, the shadows deeper. As he walked, he noticed something that froze his blood. Family portraits along the walls had changed. Where once were painted faces of proud Blackwoods in Victorian attire, now the faces were smudged, distorted, as if something had dragged a claw across the canvas. And in each frame, in the background, was now a faint figure watching from the shadows, tall, eyeless, cloaked in darkness. Lucas turned away, heart hammering. No, it's just my mind, he whispered. Just exhaustion. He went to the study where he had found the Reverend's diary. The fire had gone out, leaving the room cold and gray. Yet upon the desk lay something new, a folded letter, sealed with red wax marked by the same symbol, the triangle within a circle. With trembling hands, Lucas broke it open. Greater than to the air of the hollow. You have awakened the veil. The witness stirs between the world of flesh and the world of remembrance. To seal it once more, you must finish the ritual your ancestor began. Refuse, and the hollow shall claim all. There is no salvation, only completion. Signed, the Keepers of the Veil. Lucas stared at the letter, his breath shallow. The words, Keepers of the Veil, echoed in his mind. The townsfolk he had seen since arriving, old Mrs. Elspeth from the general store, the silent priest, the cemetery caretaker, none of them seemed normal. Could they be part of this? He didn't have time to think further. A faint tapping echoed from above him, slow, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came from the attic. Every instinct screamed for him to run. But something, curiosity or fate, pulled him toward the narrow staircase that led upward. The attic door creaked open on its own. Dust drifted through the air like falling ash. The space was cluttered with relics, broken furniture, old mirrors, stacks of forgotten trunks. But in the center of the floor stood a chair. And in that chair, facing the window, sat a figure draped in a black veil. Lucas's breath caught. Hello. The veiled figure didn't move. Only the faint rustle of fabric answered him. He took a hesitant step forward. Are you one of the keepers? He asked. A whisper filled the attic, though the figure did not speak. You were not meant to read his words. Lucas froze. The voice came from nowhere and everywhere at once. The figure's head tilted slightly, and the veil slipped just enough for him to glimpse a pale jaw, lips sewn shut with black thread. Beneath the veil, the skin was cracked like porcelain, and faint lines of dried blood traced down the neck. You carry his blood, the whisper continued. And the hollow feeds on memory. You have given it breath again. Lucas stepped back, his pulse thundering. What are you? What do you want from me? The witness wants only to be remembered. But remembrance is hunger. The attic walls began to tremble. The mirrors along the walls vibrated, then shattered one by one, reflecting flashes of the veiled figure multiplying, 10, 20, 100, until the whole attic was filled with veiled forms, all whispering his name in unison. Lucas Blackwood. He clutched the diary to his chest and ran, stumbling down the staircase as the whispers grew louder. The house itself seemed to breathe, each floorboard expanding and contracting like lungs. He burst into the corridor, only to find it completely changed. The walls now bled faintly where the wallpaper had peeled. The paintings dripped red instead of oil. And where the mirror at the end of the hall had once shown his reflection, it now showed the Reverend's face, grinning through rotted teeth. Finish it, the reflection hissed. Finish what I began. Lucas fell to his knees, clutching his head. I don't know how. Tell me what you want. The reflection's eyes flared crimson. The altar beneath the hollow. Bring the book. Bring the blood. Then the glass shattered, cutting his cheek. The voice was gone. Lucas staggered to his feet, panting. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely hold the diary. He didn't know whether to believe what he saw, but the air in the house grew heavier by the second. The ceiling above creaked. The floor beneath him trembled. The curse was alive. He grabbed his lantern and ran out the front door into the red haze that now thickened over Hollow Creek. The world outside looked wrong. The trees leaned inward as though trying to block his escape, their branches twitching like skeletal fingers. The path to the old church was no longer a path but a tunnel of fog and shadow. When he reached the church, he found the entrance sealed again, but this time with symbols drawn in fresh blood. The door pulsed faintly, the same rhythm as the diary in his hands. He pressed the book against the door. The symbols glowed bright crimson, then faded. The heavy doors creaked open, and warm, fetid air rushed out. The church's interior was no longer ruin, it had restored itself. Candles burned in every pew. The altar was whole again, draped in a crimson cloth. Behind it hung a tapestry depicting the Reverend kneeling before the witness, his arms outstretched in offering. And on the altar, a dagger waited. Lucas stepped closer, the whispers returning louder than ever. Finish it. The blood must remember. He looked down, and saw the diary's final page written in his own handwriting, though he had never written it. When the air cuts the veil, the hollow shall open once more. His hands trembled. He turned the dagger over. The handle bore his family crest. The moment he touched it, the church doors slammed shut. The candles flared, and from behind the altar, something began to rise, a shape vast and formless, darker than shadow, its eyeless face stretching toward him. The witness. Its mouth opened wide, and a sound like the screaming of the earth filled the air. Lucas stumbled back, clutching the dagger. The creature's voice filled his mind. Finish the offering, and I will remember you forever. Tears streamed down his face. No, he whispered, I won't. The creature's laughter echoed through the burning church as the floor beneath him cracked open, revealing the swirling pit of crimson light below. And then, he fell. Falling through fire. Through memory. Through time. The last thing he heard before darkness swallowed him was the Reverend's voice, calm and cold. The house remembers. And now, so will you. To be continued. Part 9. The Hollow Remembers. Historic and Horror Story 1000 words. Lucas woke to darkness. A deep, endless kind of darkness that seemed to hum with life. He was lying on cold stone, his clothes soaked with something thick and metallic smelling, blood, though he didn't know whose. When he tried to move, pain rippled through every nerve in his body. The dagger was still in his hand, its blade glinting faintly in the dim red glow that pulsed from cracks in the ground. Around him, faint shapes shifted in the gloom, faces, bodies, shadows. They whispered softly, their voices overlapping in a mournful chorus. Welcome home, heir of the hollow. Lucas staggered to his feet, his vision swimming. The chamber around him stretched impossibly wide, lined with massive columns carved with symbols he had seen in the Reverend's book. Each pillar depicted a human figure kneeling, their essence, drawn as crimson smoke, rising into a dark, eyeless being above them. It was then he realized the truth. He was standing beneath Hollow Creek, in the place the Reverend called the Vault of the Veil. He turned in a slow circle. Behind him, the stairs he'd fallen through were gone, sealed by slabs of living stone. Ahead, an altar made of bone and black marble glistened under a faint red light. Upon it lay something that made his stomach twist. A human heart, still beating. As he stared, the whispers grew louder, and from the walls, figures began to take shape. Translucent, half-decayed bodies of men and women, all wearing the rags of the enslaved. Some were missing limbs. Some bore the marks of knives and burns. Their eyes glowed faintly gold. One of them stepped forward, a tall man with sharp cheekbones and a scar across his throat. Lucas recognized him from the diary's early entries. Silas, Lucas whispered. The ghost nodded slowly. You bear his blood. Yours? Lucas asked, voice shaking. The Reverend, he did this to you. Silas's expression darkened. He began what Thornhill and Rutledge perfected. The hollow was born from blood, our blood. They believed vitality could be transferred, that the soul itself could be harvested and reused. But they went too far. They fed something they did not understand. Lucas glanced toward the altar. The witness. Silas nodded. It sleeps between worlds. Each generation of your family has been its vessel. The Reverend opened the veil. His descendants kept it alive. Lucas felt the dagger pulse in his hand again. Then tell me how to end it. Silas's gaze softened, though his voice carried centuries of pain. End it. You cannot. You are bound to it. The veil is written in your blood. But perhaps, he stepped closer, his ghostly form flickering. Perhaps you can change the memory. Rewrite the offering. Rewrite it how? The witness feeds on sacrifice, on the act of surrendering one's essence willingly. But if one of the bloodline gives their life not in surrender but in defiance, the pattern may break. The hollow may starve. Lucas's throat tightened. You're saying I have to die? Yes, Silas said simply. But this time, it will not feed. Before Lucas could respond, the air trembled. A deep vibration shuddered through the ground. Cracks spread along the walls, and the faint red light intensified into a blinding crimson glow. From the darkness beyond the altar, a shape began to form, vast, amorphous, dripping shadow. It moved like smoke but carried the weight of something ancient and sentient. The witness had awakened. Silas turned to Lucas, his voice suddenly urgent. You must choose now. The dagger is the key, it binds the veil to your bloodline. Drive it into the heart, and choose what you offer. The ghostly figures around them began to scream, not in fear, but in release, as the creature's massive form towered above them. Its eyeless face split open, revealing a mouth filled with twisting tongues of flame. Lucas Blackwood, it thundered, the voice rattling his bones. You have returned to me. Lucas staggered backward, clutching the dagger. I didn't choose this. But your blood did. Your lineage is my altar. I won't be your vessel, Lucas spat. The witness's voice grew colder. Then watch as those you love rot beneath the hollow. From the crimson mist, figures began to emerge, people from Hollow Creek. The sheriff, the preacher's wife, the townsfolk, all with hollowed eyes and ash-gray skin. Their mouths hung open as they shuffled toward him, whispering his name. He backed up until he felt the edge of the altar against his spine. Silas's voice rose above the din. Do it, Lucas. Now. Lucas raised the dagger, but the witness laughed. You think death will free you? Foolish child. The veil was never about life or death. It was about remembrance. The creature's many arms stretched outward, each one forming into a different face, faces of every Blackwood before him. His father, his grandfather, even the Reverend, himself. Finish the ritual, the Reverend's voice hissed. Or your soul will wander hollow forever. Lucas trembled, tears streaking his blood-stained cheeks. If I do this, I end you. For all of us. He turned the dagger toward his chest, but his reflection suddenly appeared in the altar's surface. His reflection smiled back, dark-eyed, whispering, Don't you see? You already have. Pain exploded in his chest as the dagger moved on its own, slicing into his flesh. He fell to his knees, gasping. Blood poured down his shirt, spilling onto the altar, feeding the pulsing heart. The witness roared triumphantly, its shadow expanding until it filled the chamber. But then something changed. Lucas's blood didn't flow like the others, it shimmered gold, not red. The heart on the altar twitched, then stopped beating. The whispers turned into screams. Silas's voice echoed above them all. He chose defiance. The witness recoiled, its formless body writhing as the golden light spread. The walls began to crumble, the red glow fading to white. One by one, the spirits of the enslaved rose upward, their chains breaking as they dissolved into light. Lucas collapsed, his body trembling, vision fading. The last thing he saw was Silas kneeling beside him, smiling faintly. You've done what none of us could, the ghost whispered. You remembered us, not as sacrifices, but as souls. Lucas tried to speak but no words came. The chamber shook violently, and a great wind roared through the collapsing vault. Silas's form began to fade. When you wake, the ghost said softly, the hollow will sleep. But remember, if it is ever forgotten again, it will return. Then everything went white. Lucas felt weightless, suspended between life and death. A voice, his own voice, or perhaps the witness's, echoed faintly in his mind. The memory is the curse. And the curse is eternal. He gasped and opened his eyes. He was lying on the road outside the Blackwood estate. The dawn sun glowed over Hollow Creek, soft and gold. The air was clear. The crimson haze was gone. The diary lay beside him, its pages blank. The dagger was rusted over, lifeless. He stood shakily, staring at the silent house. For the first time since he had arrived, it looked empty, truly empty. No whispers. No movement, just a shell. Lucas turned toward town, clutching the diary to his chest. He didn't know if anyone would believe what had happened. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The hollow remembered him. And somewhere deep beneath the earth, it still breathed. To be continued. Part 10, The Last Offering. Historic and Horror Story. Final part, 1000 words. The sun had barely risen over Hollow Creek when Lucas returned to the manor. The air was still and heavy, as though the world itself was holding its breath. He moved slowly through the fog, the ground damp from the night's storm, the earth smelling of rotten iron. The house stood before him like a corpse that refused to decay, windows shattered, shutters torn loose, the front door hanging crooked on one hinge. Birds did not sing here. Even the wind seemed to avoid this place. He hesitated at the threshold, remembering the screams, the light, the way the ground had shaken beneath him as the vault collapsed. His chest still ached from the wound, though when he lifted his shirt, the skin there was smooth, no scar, no trace. Only a faint warmth, as though something beneath his flesh still pulsed with its own heartbeat. He stepped inside. The interior was a grave of memories. The portraits on the walls were burned away, their faces blackened beyond recognition. Furniture lay overturned, glass scattered like frozen tears. Yet somehow, the study door remained intact, and beyond it, faint whispers drifted up from below. Lucas froze. He had sealed that basement. He had seen it crumble. So how? Lucas, a voice murmured from the darkness. He turned. Standing in the doorway was Silas. But this time, the ghost's form was different, more solid, almost human. His eyes burned faintly gold. "You shouldn't have come back," Silas said. "I had to know," Lucas replied. "I thought it was over." Silas looked past him toward the staircase leading down to the basement. "It is never over. You wounded it, yes. But the hollow cannot die as long as it remembers. And now," he looked at Lucas with something like sorrow. "You've remembered it more than anyone ever has." Lucas's throat tightened. "Then how do I end it?" "You can't," Silas said softly. "But you can keep it contained. You can make the last offering." Lucas shook his head. "No, I already bled for it. I gave everything." "Not everything." The stairs creaked. A cold draft blew from below, carrying the faint scent of candle wax and blood. The whispers grew louder, hundreds of voices murmuring his name. Lucas. He felt his body tremble. The pull was irresistible. Against his will, his feet moved toward the stairwell. "Silas, stop it," he gasped. The ghost reached out, grabbing his arm. For a moment, Silas's grip was real, flesh against flesh. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "It needs an heir, a guardian, someone to hold the memory without feeding it. That is the last offering." Lucas looked down into the darkness. "You mean, I have to stay?" Silas nodded once. "As long as someone remembers with truth, not fear, not hunger, it sleeps. But if it's forgotten, if the hollow is buried again, it wakes. You can hold it in your blood, in your will. But it will cost you your world." Lucas closed his eyes. "Then there's no freedom. Not for me." "Freedom isn't always the gift," Silas whispered. "Sometimes it's the sacrifice." The ground shuddered, and a low, guttural sound rose from beneath the floorboards. A red glow seeped up from the cracks, spreading across the hallway like veins of fire. Lucas looked at Silas, his decision already made. If this is what it takes, then let it be done. He descended. Each step echoed like a heartbeat. The deeper he went, the more the light grew, until the air itself seemed to hum with energy. The basement had changed. It wasn't rubble anymore. It had rebuilt itself, though imperfectly. The stone walls were warped and wet, breathing like living flesh. At the center stood the altar. The heart that had once beaten upon it was gone, replaced by a mirror, tall, ancient, framed in gold and bone. Lucas approached slowly. His reflection shimmered, rippling like water. Then, within it, he saw not himself, but all those who had come before, Thornhill, Rutledge, the Reverend, and beyond them, faces he didn't know. Slaves, victims, men and women twisted by the same hunger for life that had cursed this place. The voices merged into one. "Will you remember us, Lucas Blackwood?" He swallowed hard. "Yes. Will you bear our sins, so that no one else must?" "I will." The light intensified, blinding. The mirror's surface liquefied, stretching toward him like an open mouth. Silas's voice echoed faintly behind him. Once you cross, there is no return. You will live between memory and shadow. But the world above will be free. Lucas took a deep breath. Then let it be free. He stepped forward, and the mirror swallowed him whole. The light burst outward, flooding the manor, pouring through every crack and window. The walls shook, the earth rumbled, and a column of gold fire shot into the sky above Hollow Creek. The townspeople saw it from miles away, a pillar of light that burned for exactly 7 seconds, then vanished without a trace. When they came to investigate, the manor was gone, only an empty field remained, the earth blackened in the shape of a human heart. No one ever found Lucas Blackwood. Years passed, Hollow Creek changed. The old roads were paved, the forests thinned, and the stories of the Thornhill experiments became nothing more than whispers told to frighten children. But sometimes, on nights when the fog rolled thick over the fields, travelers swore they saw a light burning deep in the woods. A man with a lantern, walking toward the place where the manor once stood. Those who dared follow never returned. And those who stayed behind sometimes heard a voice in the mist, calm, quiet, but heavy with sorrow. Remember them. Do not forget, because forgetting is what feeds it. And the Hollow still remembers. Dash dash dash. The camera fades to black. Then Lucas's whisper echoes one last time. The curse sleeps inside memory. Don't let it wake. Clapperboard if you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe, share it with your friends, and leave a comment below. Tell me what part chilled you the most. Because the Hollow is listening.